Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korean President Lee Jae Myung has officially pulled out of the NATO summit set for this week in The Hague, citing domestic priorities and growing instability in the Middle East. But the fallout is immediate. Critics at home accuse the administration of missing a rare diplomatic window, a chance to meet President Trump and join key Indo-Pacific allies at the table. Now, with back-to-back summit opportunities lost, first at the G7, now at NATO, attention shifts to whether an August Korea-U.S. summit can fill the gap. The stakes are high, tariff deadlines are looming, defense cost pressures are mounting, and allies are watching closely. At a time when strategic alignments are hardening, Seoul faces urgent choices. So is August too late to course correct or just in time to reset Korea's global footing? For answers to this, we are joined in the studio by Min Jung-hoon, professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy with us. Welcome, Professor.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And also joining us to my left is Christophe Godin, professor of political science at Kookmin University. Good to see you, Professor.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
So let's start with Professor Min. With your broader assessment of the latest situation, do you think President Lee's absence at the NATO shows a shift towards pragmatic diplomacy, as you've been highlighting, or do you think it's perceived as a diplomatic backpedaling, rather?
Well, personally, I think that the Lee government had a long consideration before making the final decision about whether or not to attend the NATO summit this time. And it was known that the Lee government wanted to participate in the NATO summit this time until they found that the U.S. put the strike on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran on Sunday morning. And so Lee government had actively considered President Lee's attendance at the summit despite the numerous pressing domestic issues following his inauguration. Lots of things to do at the domestic arena. But after the strikes, the Lee government comprehensively reviewed the various matters and the volatile situations in the Middle East, most importantly, and finally made the decision that the President Lee would not attend the summit this time. Most importantly, it seems that the growing uncertainty in the Middle East is the #1 reason for the decision. In particular, it is important to monitor the situation and take measures to cope with the sharp rise in oil prices and exchange rates in terms of the Middle East risks. So it suggests that economic issues had the greatest influence on the decision. In addition, uncertainty of holding a bilateral summit with President Trump on the sidelines of NATO summit, I think, to affect the decision. As you know, President Lee was scheduled to hold a bilateral summit with President Trump on the sidelines at the G7 summit, but it did not take place as President Trump departed early to respond to the serious situations in the Middle East. And if a similar situation takes place again at the NATO summit, it would be very embarrassing. And even if the two leaders hold a summit at the NATO summit, it would not certain whether they would be able to focus on talking about the main issues between the two countries, like the tariff negotiations and the security issues, because the ongoing conflicts between Israel and Iran would observe almost everything at the summit. So taken together, I think the Lee government decided that President Lee would not attend the NATO summit, and instead his secret advisor, Ri Sung-nak, would attend the meeting instead. So I think that overall, the Lee government made the appropriate pragmatic decision this time.
Right, so a lot of factors have been considered in the latest decision. As Professor Min has mentioned, Lee's camp has been citing Middle East instability and the impact of the domestic affairs as the main reason for President Lee's absence. But Professor Godang, opposition leaders kind of label it as a foreign policy blunder. How should the public weigh in this very differing narratives?
I don't want to take sides, but what we can say for sure is that both of these narratives are directly in line with what we have been seeing all along the campaign. Because something that I found to be particularly interesting during Lee Jae Myung's campaign is that he declined to comment on international matters most of the time. Not to mention the Middle East, but even North Korea, he hardly mentioned it during his campaign. While on the opposite, the conservative candidate, so Kim Mok-yeon, advocated a stronger approach with Korea's backing the US, with increasing defense costs. And so what we can see now is the continuation of what we have seen during these campaign meetings. As far as we can tell, it seems that President Lee's approach, as Professor Min put it, can be described as pragmatic. Pragmatic, or if I am a bit more specific, wait and see. The problem is that Korea has no close allies in East Asia. Korea depends heavily on the US, and the US is extremely unpredictable under Trump's administration. You need to keep in mind that Trump decided to back Iran against the will of the overwhelming majority of the American people and against most of his own political party. So what we can tell that for the moment, President Lee's approach is pragmatic. I understand that this wait and see stance can be a bit disappointing, but honestly, what else to do? Honestly.
All right. So there definitely has been a lot of, reactions to the latest decision. Of course, rival parties have been doing that, but we'll have to see on further possibilities for talks with Washington moving forward. Now, expanding to Professor Godang's comments, Professor Min, politically speaking, do you think there's a risk that Seoul's latest absence could embolden narratives that it's kind of leaning towards pro-Beijing, pro-Moscow, especially with NATO signaling its Indo-Pacific tilt?
Well, basically, I don't think that Seoul's absence to the NATO summit this time would make a negative impact on its position between US and China. As you know, Japan and Australia also decided that their leaders would not participate in the NATO summit this time based on the similar regions' restrictions with South Korea, domestic affairs and uncertain situations in the Middle East. They needed to take care of what happens in their domestic arena or something like that. So, regarding the foreign policy of the Lee government, I think that the Lee government pursues the pragmatic diplomacy that tries to cultivate a favorable strategic environment for South Korea in East Asia. But it's just still the early stage of the administration, so it still needed a little more time before it elaborates its foreign policy directions and the specific policies or something like that. It'll take some time before the preparation, the committee, finishes its job probably in the 30 days or the 6 days. We need to little bit wait and see what actually we'll have for the foreign policy of this current administration. Anyway, I think that based on the evidence I got for the Lee government, it tries to elaborate its foreign policy and particularly its foreign policy is firmly standing on the strong ROK-US alliance, and it also strengthens trilateral cooperation with the US and Japan, while also advancing each bilateral relations with Japan. So it means that under the continuity of the previous government of South Korea, it tries to strengthen its relations with US and Japan. And while it also tries to manage its relations with China and Russia pragmatically. So it is totally different from what the previous progressive government, Moon Jae-in government, pursued under its term in office. It was like the balanced balanced strategy or strategic balance between the two countries, like U.S. and China. But the strategic environment surrounding South Korea is now totally different from the past under the Moon government. So now the South Korea is leaning toward getting closer toward the U.S. and Japan because the South Korea's strategic environment needs South Korea to move a little bit getting toward the U.S. and the Japan compared to the distance with China and Russia. So it's very clear that the Lee government pursues the strategic autonomy, which means that based on each national interest, where it is getting close to the U.S. and China, the U.S. and Japan, it will also try to pragmatically manage its relations with China and Russia. So it suggests that under the Lee Jae Myung government, there would be no pro-China or no pro-Russia leanings anymore. It should be clear, and we will see what the Lee Jae Myung government would actually pursue in its foreign policy for its relations with those countries.
Right. Of course, it's in the early stages of its administration, of course. Now, so we have seen the G7 and NATO summits missed as for talks with President Trump. The presidential office is now eyeing an August summit with Washington. Professor Godin, how feasible do you think is this timeline? And do you think this can realistically restore South Korea's standing and momentum?
Well, first, I think it is feasible, and I don't think there is any other way. Because, in fact, as Professor Min mentioned, maybe the Korean public is not aware enough of how fast the Democratic Party's doctrine has changed when it comes to international relations. During the Moon administration, as Professor Moon mentioned, there was a doctrine of multilateralism, of a balanced relationship between China and America and other major powers. Now it is true that in the view of President Lee, we live in a much more dangerous world. And in a dangerous world like this world, a middle power like Korea needs allies. And the only realistic ally to be found here is America. The issue is that it is Trump's America. And so I do not think that for Korea it will be realistic to approach Trump's America alone. And so what we saw, for instance, a few weeks ago during the G7 summit that Trump left abruptly, is that Lee Jae Myung, for the little time he spent there, tried to strengthen ties with other middle powers. He met with the president of South Africa, he met with the Prime Minister of Australia, he tried to strengthen ties with the EU, so with other allies of America that could somehow be expected to alleviate Trump's influence on America. So I think that this timeline is reasonable. It is reasonable because the Lee administration has time to prepare. It is reasonable because in 2 months from now, obviously dust will have settled down. And so back then, I do not expect Korea to be able to move alone. Korea will need allies, maybe Japan, maybe Australia, maybe the EU. But it is unreasonable to assume that Korea alone could have an influence on President Trump. So Korea needs allies. And these allies, where are they to be found, if not in these international summits? So I think it is a perfectly reasonable approach in total.
Professor, you've mentioned South Korea reaching out to America's allies, as part of efforts to, strategically show alliance with America as well. But practically, how do you think South Korea can, reaffirm its alliance commitment before a potential August meeting with President Trump?
It depends. It can be practical, and if I am very specific here, it can be with giving America the technology America needs, in particular semiconductors and other industries that have had to take a terrible blow because of Trump's tariffs. So it can be through some sort of economic agreements. It can be with providing weapons, specifically. It can also be with declarations. For instance, last year, South Korea, along with a few other countries, provided a statement to back America's action in the Red Sea when America bombed Houthi rebels, in Yemen. So the interesting thing here is that if you compare, for instance, with the American bombing of Iraq 20 years ago, Trump does not seem to expect military support from his allies. The bombing of Iran was decided almost single-handedly. So I think Korea can show signs of support without having to send troops or soldiers. I think it can be done realistically without getting too much involved, with subtle signs.
Right. So as to clarify, we have to expand areas of cooperation with Washington to strengthen alliance with Washington.
Long story short, commodities, cooperation, but no troops, because this will backfire.
All right.
Definitely.
Thank you for the clarification, Professor. So with economic pressure rising and time ticking on U.S. trade deadlines, as of now, Professor Min, what kind of leverage do you think South Korea has left leading into a possible August talks with Washington?
Well, basically, in tariffs negotiations with the U.S., South Korea tries to reduce its trade surplus while highlighting South Korea's strategic importance and values and increase cooperation in shipbuilding, energy, and other areas in order to increasing the economic benefits of both countries. Because basically South Korea believes that the outcome of the ongoing tariff negotiations would be beneficial for both countries, not just one country. Through these contributions, South Korea will try to persuade the U.S. to eliminate reciprocal and sectoral tariffs that U.S. paused to impose for 90 days to South Korea. And as you know, the shipbuilding industry is an area where U.S. want to increase cooperation with South Korea in order to respond to China's growing naval power. The U.S. desperately want to secure capabilities in the shipbuilding sector. And as you know, the American shipbuilding, the capabilities have lost its competitiveness. So cooperation with South Korea, which has the world-class shipbuilding capabilities, could be the best option for the United States. In addition, the Trump government want to expand America's energy dominance to East Asia. Accordingly, it hopes that South Korea also, along with Japan and Taiwan, will actively participate in the Alaska LNG project. So the three countries would be the major consumers of the Alaska energy. And so South Korea and the U.S. are now going through the tough and fierce negotiations at the working level. And it's unclear which level the two countries will compromise, but they are working hard to achieve a satisfying result for both countries. But the details are unknown yet, so we'll see what actually we will see at the final stage. Anyway, considering the strategic importance and the value between the two countries, I hope that they would produce an outcome that both of them could be satisfied.
Right, let's hope so. Then, Professor Min, let's step aside a little bit to the global posture again. So with global conflicts happening, escalating in parts of the world, how do you think South Korea might be able to position itself as a relevant and also a proactive middle power, especially ahead of the UN General Assembly and APEC?
Well, basically, the Lee Jae Myung government wanted South Korea, wants South Korea to establish itself as a global leading state. Specifically, along with the strong ROK-US alliance, South Korea would also promote the regional cooperation and the international solidarity, grounded in its national strengths and universal the principles of cooperation like openness, inclusiveness, and solidarity. So the strategy grounded in the South Korea's national interests, and it aims to advance both national interests and universal values at the national, regional, and global levels by actively contributing to the resolution of conflicts and threats and promoting peace and prosperity. So it tries to, as Professor Godin mentioned, it tries to form the solidarity with the major powers, like middle powers, like European countries, Japan, and Australia, and India, and the like-minded countries, based on the international values and norms and the universal principles of cooperation. So it means that South Korea pursues both national interests and universal values, because the exclusive and assertive pursuit of national interest alone is incompatible with the global leading state diplomacy, because South Korea is a middle power country, so it needed to increase the cooperation with like-minded countries and the middle power countries altogether. So I hope that South Korea, as a global leading state, would play a significant role in resolving conflicts and making progress in peace and prosperity of the global community. So South Korea want to have the good cooperation with like-minded countries like France and other European countries and Japan, other middle powers.
Right. That's a very significant, important point to close our discussion on. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insights tonight. Professor Min, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And of course, Professor Godin, we appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.